Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven.
And I'm Jonathan.
Whoa. And today we're talking about the Netrunner Reboot. Well, what have you been up to this week?
Who?
Either of you?
He looked over at you first.
I actually looked here. You weren't looking, and then I looked over at Steven.
I think he was looking at Ben. This week, we did this L5R, learning L5R video, and I think it's correct. Like, it feels very much exactly like what we need to be doing. And it's been very well received, and you know, we'd had content discussions 1,000 times in the past 6 months. What should we be doing?
Really, for the past several years.
What are our strengths? Like, what can we bring to the space? What's most helpful? How can we make it easier for people to get involved? And just kind of the journey of learning a game and all these kinds of discussions. And I'm glad we just decided to try it and see what worked. We kind of dealt with it with Star Wars Destiny. We got into it a little bit. But we're really, I'm just pleased. I'm pleased. And everybody
with the learning
seems to
L5R
have,
series, eh?
Yeah, everybody seems to have really taken to it. More positive feedback than I was expecting. I'm a bit of a pessimist when it comes to feedback, but it's all been extremely positive, and so I'm just kind of like riding that high because that feels really good to feel like something has really been done well, which is kind of what I live for. And then speaking of, we're in the middle of the Saga set production.
For Empire War.
That's always a noted shift in the operations side of
right
things.
Behind that door.
Right behind that door, yeah. They're being made right now at this moment.
Yeah, we hear loud sounds. That's what's happening.
And that's great. And it's ahead of schedule. It's better than we've ever done. It's faster than it's ever been. I know that Robert put a lot of work into managing the logistics and the systems involved in that whole process. It gets bigger and more kind of intensive every time. So a lot of really positive things happening, which is nice. And L5R is actually like I'm more into it than ever because I keep playing these games on camera, and when you're talking through these decisions over and over, you're just like, okay, like it's my own brain, you know, having a chance to not judge too quickly or not look at things in a way that isn't up for debate. So as I'm like talking through things, Zach can offer feedback, and then it's like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. That actually makes it a way more interesting mechanic. Those kinds of things. And so I'm really digging that more and more as we go along. I got hammered in this last game, by the way. I'm sorry.
Spoiler, it's probably out by now.
I know Jonathan's a Crab fan.
Yeah. That's all right. I was watching the video, and I think that your getting hammered was a very good negative example for people to learn what not to do.
It's a reality of games.
Yeah.
You're going to lose some real.
You're going to lose some.
Well, and it
seriously.
very much was dependent on my practicing with Phoenix and kind of.
That's true.
Yeah, Zach was like 30 games in.
It all happened how you want it to happen. But
he had the passion behind him.
Yeah.
I will note on the Learning L5R and the L5R experience in general. I know last week was the Should You Play L5R podcast. But when you get to a certain point in the game where you go from learning the actual game to learning how to play the game better, like, and conceptually you're at that next stage, you kind of turn the corner. Really, that's the entire intent behind that series, which is helping people get to that point faster, so that it's not I'm figuring out how to manipulate this board and keep track of everything, and it's how do you actually successfully play this game.
It's really and it really truly is a look behind the curtain of how this is exactly what it's like. We've been learning games together for 15 years at this point.
Yeah, 15 or 16 years.
And that's exactly what it looks like every time.
When we don't have the cameras on, that's it.
Yeah, we're just essentially showing you this is kind of how we think about it when we first start out. I was looking at the YouTube description, and I was wanting to write something about like, this is a look behind the sausage factory.
Yeah, that would be incorrect.
And I was like, there's just no way to write that where it's not so wrong. It's like hot dogs,
like
you're watching hot dogs.
The thing, but it's just wrong.
It's always a bit of a disaster whenever you watch, like, you know, it's a commonly known thing. Don't watch hot dogs getting made if you enjoy hot dogs. But yeah, I couldn't get it there. So a little, I guess a little tidbit for people.
A little
listening.
behind the scenes.
This is what it's like to try to name.
Oh man! Well,
try to name things.
Segueing that. What about you, John?
Well, there's not much sausage-based humor that I can segue off of.
Oh, I don't believe that.
Not for a second. You and Ben have greatest puns.
I haven't even eaten a sausage in a while. So
wow,
that's sad.
Looking after his heart.
Sauerkraut
So I'm a big
right?
sauerkraut fan. I'm a big cabbage-based food fan.
We're having cabbage tonight.
Oh, there you go. As my friend's wife says, that it's the stinky foods. I like to eat the stinky foods. And actually, we were over at their house on Friday, so that was good. Also, I'd like to point out I did not spend every night in my own bed this last weekend.
Recurring theme.
So you can take that, Zach.
He's a wanderer, vagabond.
I'm a wanderer, yeah.
Gypsy soul.
Kept to himself mostly.
We keep my wife and I keep an air mattress in the back of our car so that whenever we go somewhere we can crash. It's very nice. So anyhow, that's basically it. Much like Steven, I continue to want to play more L5R, and
it's a good sign.
It's a good sign. The only problem for me is that I think really at this point every podcast that we do should be titled "Should You Play L5R Now?"
Is this what we're kind of experiencing?
Because it just continues to evolve. You know, we can't really put a period on the sentence because it does appear that the more games that we play, the more that we enjoy the system.
That should be good, right? And that should be expected.
Yeah, that should be expected. And as a deep system, as a complex system, that is sort of the understanding of it. The more that you get to where you have the sort of not looking at the controller like we talked about last week, the flow, then the easier and the better it becomes. And as you learn about the mechanics and all that stuff. And then lastly, I think the only thing worth pointing out is I just had a 30-minute long conversation with the barista over at Nordagio's where we get our coffee while I was waiting for my espresso shot. He has just recently gotten into tabletop games. And we were he was just like, he was on fire, and I love seeing that. He was so excited. He's going to come over hopefully tonight and play Destiny, so it should be really good. But he was just talking about like he went from nothing to going over to his friend's house starting to play Destiny, and then like all of a sudden realizing that there is a whole other world. But not only there's a whole other world, but that because he had played Destiny and Blood Rage and a few more, that it becomes easier and easier to get into this world. You know, like you start to learn the language, so to speak. So his eyes lit up whenever we were talking about it, and it was just so fun to see.
Wow.
So I was very, very happy about
getting
that.
in on Destiny is like if you haven't had Advil before and you start taking Coke, you know what I mean? Like, that's like a really serious intro.
That is an apt analogy.
That's a serious, that's like right in the veins kind of stuff.
But to be fair, I mean,
didn't even start with Catan, you know?
Getting into the like full-on Destiny community, yes, but at the same time, the actual game itself, I think I could probably teach to like my 8 or 9-year-old nephew. So
to me, I think about explaining to a new player how a collectible game works, and like how do you get them past?
You know, it's a game.
It's like
baseball cards, but
spend hundreds of dollars on these cards. See, and you never know which ones you're going to get.
I'll tell you what you do is, and this is a perfect segue into what my week looked like because Empire at War came out last week.
Yeah,
which is you tell them, hey, here's this 2-player starter.
Yeah,
and it's great. And you want to start here, you need 2 of these. You'll build 2 decks.
Here's your first hit.
It'll be fun, you see. And then after they have the starters, you say, hey, this weekend we're going to be drafting some Destiny. You really don't need to bring anything. The local community is going to have everything you need. It's going to be awesome. Bills come, you'll get new cards.
Yeah.
Then they play in a draft.
Bring your wallet.
Bring your wallet. Important. But you play in a draft like I did this weekend, and you know.
That is the best way to do it.
Like I played 2 drafts on Saturday. It was really fun. New set drafting is one of my favorite things. But for new players, there's just some newer players there, and it's really awesome. And like, there was actually one new player there, and anything that I drafted that wasn't a legendary, so all the rares and commons and uncommons, and a couple other people are doing the same, are just being given to the new players.
That's awesome.
And so it's like,
correct.
Hey, here's more cards. Here's more cards.
That's really cool.
So that's what you do, and that's what I did. We're planning on doing an episode dedicated to Destiny / Empire at War, so I won't dive too far into my thoughts there. And that'll let us get to the actual topic, which is the Netrunner reboot. Before we really dive into that, though,
a few tears.
Add
like happiness. Just excitement.
I was
just
like,
a moment of silence for something that has been talked about, dreamed of, and hoped for a long time. Not necessarily in this form.
Everyone knew it was coming.
It's the start. No, we didn't.
We knew the rotations were coming.
We knew the rotation was coming, but honestly, rotation
so hard.
I could not care less about.
The problem with the rotation is that, and if
it rotates my favorite cards out and
the
keeps
worst cards are
the worst
still there.
cards in the game.
That's the problem. So before we get to what happened, which is the actual what is rotation, what happened with Netrunner, what's the synopsis of that, I'd like to talk about why it got to that point.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
Why? Well, that's a harder question. I don't know why exactly. I don't know why certain cards were printed. But how it got there is a very kind of easy diagnosis, right? I think this is the case that this is the thing that all LCGs, all games, all interesting, all interests have to do is you're constantly competing with new interests or hobbies or ways people could spend their time, right? So an easy example, right, is when World of Warcraft came out.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of other hobbies that probably suffered from that, including tabletop games, was immense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily about there's a grand failing that happens or like something goes wrong with the particular hobbyist, that either something better comes along or something does go wrong with what you're currently doing. And that can happen in any and all forms, right? A climbing gym could come to Tulsa and all of a sudden 20 of your Netrunner players get into climbing and then they go do that together instead of playing Netrunner. So there's always a competition among the way that people spend their time. So as a game, you're competing for that time. And so the game experience has to be great. The community has to be strong. It has to be valuable to come in and participate and to be a part of this, gaming group. And so for whatever reason, and we'll talk about that, Netrunner, kind of continued to get to a point where it was less and less interesting to A, join the community, and B, stay in the community. And this is a very natural phenomenon, very common phenomenon. It happens with a good number of hobbies, but especially in games. I think it happens quite a bit simply because it's an interest set that is so easily migrated from. Mm-hmm. Like for instance, you're talking about somebody getting into Star Wars Destiny. The ease with which that person could get into then L5R as opposed to mountain biking is tremendous. Yeah, right? Sure. So like your ability to kind of move and find these new and exciting games is very, very like elevated once you're in the space. And then also you have essentially, it's like you're always looking for that fresh burst of energy. So when you're learning a game and you're discovering its intricacies and there's this like great sense of mystery and unknown about it, like L5R right now. Oh, how do I play the Phoenix Clan? How do I get Crab Clan to work? Who am I supposed to splash with? Yeah. Oh my gosh, nobody knows. We just have to play and figure it out and put our brains together. That's a really exciting phase for a game. And even if it's happening, let's say 20 years down the line, some new player gets into L5R and this is all new. And who are the clans and how am I going to choose my clan? And so that's a very addicting part of games, right? So it becomes an existing game has to overcome the excitement of all the new shiny stuff and be that good and that solid. And I think if I'm actually evaluating it from a systems perspective, older games should have the advantage of established communities. Newer games should have the advantage of discovery, mystery, those kinds of things. So the established game and community of Netrunner had degraded to a point where it was very easy to either leave entirely for other things or transition to other games, LCGs, collectible games, whatever it was. I think that's essentially what happened on a macro scale.
Well, and I think
it has happened 1,000 times over in the past probably year even. For various games.
Well, various, I would say even various genres.
History of the genre, right?
Yeah, you see this a lot in everything. I mean, look at back in the day whenever Warcraft, the game, broke the RTS model. It was like, oh my gosh. And then you have Command & Conquer, you have all sorts of stuff that are slight variations trying to cannibalize this huge audience. Same thing with, I forget what started it. Was it Halo? That started the FPS revolution. And you see that
Wolfenstein
playing
3D?
Wolfenstein 3D, yeah. But you see, like, people, then other companies come in after this first mover and try to snipe off some of the successful
and be
thing.
Better, optimize the experience, those kinds of things.
So ultimately, it was because Netrunner was, and the LCG model, I think really brought about by Netrunner, was so successful that everyone else is like, oh, and even when Magic first started out, there was like, basketball.
Thousands of 90s CCGs.
There was an IP. It was
so like you see this sort of cannibalization because a game or anything has proved the audience exists, and there's a decent bet that you can make that we can peel off some of that audience.
It's not the story of the tabletop gaming industry.
I mean, that's every industry.
It's the story of every industry. But yes, I mean, the story of the tabletop gaming industry has always been this propensity to cannibalize an existing audience rather than grow a new audience.
Well, and I think with particularly expandable games like this, where people dive in, they start to try to master a craft really, or a hobby, and it's just like any other hobby really. But even if a game did a really good job of staying healthy, staying very fun, whatever attracted you to it in the first place, stayed in place, offered you new things to consider enough, there would still be, there's that first year or two of playing a game, there's nothing like that. And it's very hard to replicate that on a consistent basis, and very few games have. But even if it did all those things right, there would still be a certain amount of the core player base that leaves for one reason or another, right? It's more exciting to get into this experience, but then it is accelerated by the fact of if the game changes too slowly, if you're not offering things to keep the players that have been playing Netrunner now for 5 years super engaged.
Here's what I would say that it is the most encouraging and interesting about that, comment, that there are all sorts of similar kind of offerings, is that I think in Netrunner we actually have a game that there is really nothing that I have engaged in that is like the Netrunner experience. When I think about fantasy card games, when I think about playing units, attacking, defending, trying to capture, conquer, eliminate, gain power, whatever it is, I've seen that a lot. That is not, and when I'm playing Netrunner, that's not the same genre at all, right? Like, this is an entirely new...
What was it that Shannon, Stephen's wife, said you were trying to teach her maybe Game of Thrones or any number of card games, and she really liked Netrunner, but it was because she said that she just doesn't have that general...
She's like, mindset. I don't think about what it's like to control an army. Yeah, like, I'm not interested in that.
Ultimately, how many card games boil down to you're controlling troops on a field? Well, and Netrunner's not that.
I think the trick there is that is very unique in terms of Netrunner, but the experience of playing a new game for a year or two is something that is being offered in new ways every year with each new release, and there is nothing quite like that.
Diving in
that first year or two. But effectively, Netrunner, it seems to me, developed and evolved in a way that was really, really exciting. I mean, it had a huge release back in 2012. Product was selling out. They were reprinting it. It was selling out. They were reprinting it. It was selling out. They couldn't keep up. I just remember
it was so unexpected. You could just feel how unexpected it was.
At Gen Con in particular, there was a huge line with X-Wing as well that same year. And I just remember every time a pack would come out, the excitement online, in the community, on the forums, in the store. It's just like, oh my goodness.
It was our first unboxing video.
Yeah, it's like everything has changed. This whole game is upside down. And over time, I distinctly remember back in like the end of 2015, they had the HAC tournament series happening. And I remember we hosted one of the like finales here, or maybe it was the finale here.
I think it was the finale, at least for this region.
And I remember it was this weird kind of inflection point, which was, it felt like we were kind of at the peak. And it was also that same time frame when there were 5 or 6 months and there were no product coming out. Then when product did start,
entropy was starting to mount pretty significantly at
like
that
point. And it feels like it kind of happens with LCGs at that 1.5 to 2.5 year mark, where there's enough product out that it's kind of reached a critical mass of complexity, which the player base really loves, the current player base. But it also now becomes pretty difficult for someone new to come in. It also, now there's a lot less to explore. One pack coming out does a lot less to the game. So there's no more of those big, exciting shakeups. And so I think, we're talking about why do games fail a few episodes ago. And it felt like that moment where all this, right after that, you started adding players way slower than you were losing players. And following that, we had the Mumbad cycle, which is basically notorious at this point for adding a lot of the cards that basically removed the essence of Netrunner. Like it was this like constantly reshuffling your deck, playing assets, doing this weird thing. And so combined with that delay, with that time period, you had a series of releases and cycles that kind of totally changed the game in a way that wasn't like exciting for the current player.
And it was Faust, it was the relevance of ice. Decks were running 3 pieces of ice, 6 pieces of ice, just rushing, drawing, playing out. You can't even get this over here because it's so taxing. And it has nothing to do with ice and icebreakers. And so it was so much about teching for specific matchups and knowing how to play against these 7 assets on the board and which ones do you trash first, which ones do you leave alone, what are the conditions in which you make these decisions. And so like I've constantly referred to it as like it was like learning a boss in Sonic. There's no user ability to control their destiny when first encountering this situation. There are no ways for you to gather enough information in the game to make an informed decision or even just a reasonable decision. It's that like, here's a card, I know what it does by reading it. I don't know that there's these 7 cards underneath that make my plan to deal with that card totally obsolete. And so you just have to learn every card that's going to be in this other deck, what you're supposed to do, this one first, if not this, then that one. And it's just literally like learning stuff. And for a competitive scene, some people would say that's what it is, right? You're supposed to learn all the decks in the meta,
but like
know them heart to heart. But listen to this though. I went into every Netrunner tournament having almost no real understanding of what was going on. Like that first Gen Con tournament, which was amazing, right? I think I did top 16 or top 32. I had no idea what was going on there. It was new.
There was not a
Nobody knew
meta,
what was happening. But like what I did is I built a deck that had icebreakers, fundamentals, it had money, and it had a couple of tricks. And I was able to go into every single matchup having seen corps that were built in ways that I had never even imagined and figure it out during play what my best options were to beat them by about turn 3 to 5 to 6, right? And seeing how it's going. And that, to me, is the entire appeal of a game like Netrunner. It has never been about learning the specific cards and having this... It's about being a hacker and encountering unknowns at every turn and adapting, right? It should be about adaptation.
And I remember distinctly, because I used to play Netrunner and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And we actually, the same year that HAC tournament happened earlier, we had a regional. And I played.
That's a fun story.
And I had not been playing Netrunner, right? But at the same time, back then, it was much more the case that if you knew how to play Netrunner, then you could make statistically, like you could basically run the stats and make risky or unrisky moves and make decisions and kind of play the game. I ended up top 8ing that event randomly.
Knowing nothing about the meta or anything else. Just playing fundamentals,
fact,
right?
And after I lost my last game, Tim was just like, hey, you could have just done X and you would have probably won. I was like, I had no idea that was even a thing you could do. But anyways, the point of that is that at some point it shifted from knowing effectively how to play the game to having to know the ins and outs of every card in the game to even, like it's a different skill, right?
Doesn't that always, first of all, does that always happen to expandable games at some point where it gets too big? And if not, second, is it just the fact that Netrunner lost track of fundamentals? Because the moment that you lose the fundamentals of a game, that's when it's about memorization. Because if I can't come into a card pool with a fundamental understanding of how the game functions and build a deck that can do well, then something has gone wrong with the fundamentals of the game, right?
Yeah, it's sort of like knowing, like in Netrunner, knowing that this kind of exchange is mathematically good for you, right? Some credit exchange. I run a server, I know I'm going to make them spend money to res ice, and if whatever the case may be, right? Like I knew early Netrunner, if I had a Sentry Breaker out, I could face check an ice, and the worst it could go for me, right? Like I'm not going to lose the game.
Got that neural katana, man.
It's like, but I know I can like break this one thing, make them spend money, and then I'm out, and it was worth my time to do it. And then that fundamental like philosophical understanding of a game, right, of the principles of how to play the game, didn't matter anymore when it's like I need to know the 12 cards that are face down over there, or I don't have a shot. Like it's a very, very different skill, but I think there's a lot that goes into this. I think it's not just the complexity of the game and losing sight of the essence. I think it gets difficult for players to get in. I think it's that time frame of a game. Old players stop being as excited, right? It's like we've been playing for 2 years. We understand how to play. And for the players that memorize it all, they may still have a good time, but at the same time, it is less likely to be super interesting and exciting for them even, because there's less space to explore. There's archetypes of decks and all this kind of thing. So then the real kind of shift for me is we have this thing happening with Netrunner. So revised core set, they're rotating the original core set out. There's rotation where we're losing some of the early cycles. But I guess step one would be, can you give me like an overview of what's happening in Netrunner right now? And then I want to talk about if that is it enough to get the old players super excited and interested to keep playing? Is it helpful for new players to get in? I have a ton of questions based on that.
Yeah. I hope I have the answer. Okay, well, let's talk about what's happening. And that is a revised core set. And this is actually a stickier situation than I had anticipated. Because having talked to one of our great friends, great customer member of the store, Hank, who's been just an incredible asset to the Netrunner community forever, since the beginning, right?
Day one.
Day one. And he was talking about how he felt a little bit betrayed by the fact that when you announced rotation, there were evergreen products listed. The core set, the deluxe expansions. What's the point of having an evergreen product if you change it?
That's a good point.
So you made the promise to that player base, if you buy this thing, it will always be usable in a tournament. And now you're saying the contents of this thing are no longer usable.
So and specifically, the thing that you said was going to go away, the first 2 cycles, so the first 12 releases for this game, is going away. But the cards from it are actually coming back in the revised core set, replacing some of those core set cards, which is sort of a problem.
Yeah. So I think the mistake was ever saying anything is evergreen. Wrong.
A lifelong commitment to a product.
Never. I mean, that would be like anybody who's designing a computer game saying like, this will always be this. This will always be the cost. It's like, no, anything can be patched. Yeah. We should have the agency to change anything at any point.
And even just, we will always support this game.
Right.
It's like, yeah.
Maybe not.
But are you really going to commit to that?
Yeah, exactly. And many, there are instances throughout history of people making those kinds of guarantees and then it being a real problem, like lifetime warranties, like that went sideways, those kinds of things. But so that's, I think, what the revised core set had to happen. Something like that had to happen because the core set that was currently in the game was so packed with good, disproportionately good and efficient cards that could never have counterparts, right? That you were left with actually a very limited amount of fundamental design space because everything was so fundamentally good out of the core set. It set the standard so high.
Is part of why in the latest couple of cycles you had development of cards. It seems to me
gimmicky cards
had to go in a weird way.
Yeah.
Because it's like, as an example, Desperado as a console was so efficient at doing what it did.
Gaining money, which is really what this game is about. Everybody needs to understand Netrunner is a game about 2 credit pools. And that is the baseline resource exchange game. That's all that there is.
The fact that you have a corporation is half of this game. Credits certainly have to be a part of this. Which is why Faust, which was a breaker who used cards instead of money, presents a problem.
And listen, I get that, right? Like I get the idea of that. That seems so harmless up front.
Yeah.
That, well, what if we incentivize, this is our very first Netrunner interview after Gen Con with the guy who won playing Kentucky, which nobody thought was worthwhile. He said the corp right now can't win the credit game, so I was trying to win the card game. Like discarding cards from hand and run them out of deck. And it's like, of course, that's genius.
Yeah.
So you print Faust, and then everybody plays Faust, then you'll see corps that start then to attack cards. Everything will be good. We get Junebug back in the game, and like it'll be a natural hedge. It just didn't work out that way.
Yeah.
What it did was it just gave everybody the opportunity to run without any care of ice at all, and then credits didn't matter. So the entire exchange of the game, where I could look at your credits and know that, hey, I have to pay 4, but I'll make them pay 3, and then every time they want to get into this server, they got to pay 3 more. So that's going to be in my interest in the long run. It's like I'll pay 4, they'll pay 0, and then we'll continue playing. Right? So that doesn't. It's just wrong.
Yeah, and
right?
the inherent
fundamentally wrong
structure of the game, right, is built on that concept you just mentioned, which is the fact that the corp pays for something once.
They invest once, and then they should get a constant return of taxing you over and over.
Whereas the runner gets to pay for it every time.
Yeah.
And so in theory, just because of the way the game is set up, the early game is the runners, the mid game is the corpse, and if it goes super long, you're back in the runner's
You're
house.
kind of back to runner,
Like that's kind of the natural flow of that game. But anyways, because of the core set being so efficient with its cards, right? Even Kate, the runner, for
-1
Shaper,
discount. Yeah.
it's like, this is so economically fundamentally good. If you look at the other runner Shapers, they're doing interesting things. But it almost always comes back to noise and Kate and the original HB. I mean, these are the things it's so efficient that if you're going to play that game, the actual, like, the Netrunner as we knew it up front, this is just where you're at.
And I think the best way to think about this is that if you think about the fundamentals of Netrunner, similar to like whenever Star Wars Destiny came out, right? I ended up writing the blog about how like action chaining was not what I would consider to be the fundamentals of Destiny, and that was a problem. If you look at the fundamentals of Netrunner, and I don't know that we can clearly spell them out because it gets a little tricky, and I've had conversations about this, but so much of it is about the raw economic exchange, like we've been talking about here, credits transferring back and forth and making transactions with your opponent to say, I will bet 2 credits on this access, or I will bet 5 credits on this access. And then your opponent having the option to say, I will raise you 3 credits, basically, to make this harder for you, to see if you have an answer. And, you know, that's one element of it. The other element of it is there used to not really be a lot of hidden information that was interrupt style stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I did a thing, and then all of a sudden this card comes out of my hand, and oh, we didn't expect it. Everything on Netrunner was on the board whenever the action was initiated.
There were no cancels out of hand.
No,
that was
none
one
of
of
that
the things
stuff.
that struck me about
And
Netrunner.
it was very much like you were interacting with the board, right?
It
like
was,
the corp didn't go when I was going.
Exactly. Like if I made a run, I knew here are all of the unknowns on the board. So the number of potential things that could be happening. Here's how much money the corp has. Am I willing to risk this or not? So when you start having a lot of these weird, like, flip this stuff up during a run and all of a sudden everything has changed, it's a little less exciting to me, you know, because it's just, this is something that I wasn't able to account for as easily, like all of these random effects that start happening all at once. And like it's not that that's not a part of the game from the beginning, but as those effects mount and mount and mount, all of a sudden now a run is about, do they have these 7 cards that they like flip up, and now all of a sudden I'm running on this server instead, and this stuff's happening. So because you look at the fundamentals of the game, and there's some very basic fundamentals, and the core set cards were playing those fundamentals so incredibly well. So then what does that leave for design and development? You can't play and print fundamental Netrunner cards because they're already the best ever in the core set.
It's basically like if you had a video game and it's about jumping and you gave someone the ability to fly in the first level.
Yeah.
And it becomes very difficult to challenge that correctly,
there,
right? Yeah, like if if the problem is that those cards were so good that creating a decent challenge for it became impossible, so you had to avoid it altogether, right? That's where you get fouls, that's where you get stuff that's outside because those cards were so good.
And that's what we're dealing with, right? It makes perfect sense how development has to design non-fundamental cards, which makes the game feel less like Netrunner, because the cards that feel like Netrunner are two right here, like they're like right out of the core set. You can't do better.
Well, and I wonder if because to me, I think about like Kate. And it's like, when I see her in play, I don't inherently think, oh, she's too good. She's breaking the game. She's winning everything. And I actually heard Hank talking with Tim, and he was like, do you really think like Kate needs to go away? Like this kind of thing. And my kind of retort or response was, the problem isn't Kate. It's directly. I say this in everything we talk about. It's what Kate is forcing the development to do, which is, or Desperado, or Noise, where it's like Noise on Anarch means that you have to be careful in how much synergy you're giving him, how fast the runner can deck the corp, kind of a thing. And like when you're designing a Anarch runner, right, you're in a box. Like he's creating a box that you have to be within to even be interesting, let alone playable.
I mean, think about when you're evaluating anything, and this is actually fascinating. I get so worked up about Netrunner, I love it so much.
I can feel it. I love it.
You think about all of these ideas and how you value them, doesn't it just come down to credits? So when I think about Kate, that's probably 15 to 20 credits a game. When I think about Wizard, if there's a lot of assets, that's 15 to 20 easily a game. When I think about Gabe, you're getting 2 credits every time you're in HQ, or first time you're in HQ. How much money is that going to make you over the course of a game? Think about Chaos Theory. Don't have to install memory cards, so I'm saving actions and money. It all comes down to actions and money. And they're essentially the same thing.
Comparing Chaos Theory to Kate, right? So I was never... when the core set came out, I was a Kate fan. Started playing Shaper because whatever reason, I liked Kate. And then Chaos Theory came out, and I was just like, This is no. Like I was like, this is not good. And I remember at the time arguing with some of the players in the store, like they were like, "Oh, Chaos Theory is awesome! Like this, you get a lower deck count."
It is an absolute fan favorite, by the way. Chaos Theory is a huge,
which is great.
Yeah.
But the thing for me is,
but not
this was the revelation, right? Which is, I was talking with Hank in that same conversation recently, and it was like, when you take Kate out of the game, and now we're looking at Shaper runners. Chaos Theory is now a real conversation, right?
All of them become a real
I also really like
conversation.
Kit. I've always liked Kit, which she has a very different kind of ability. But like the reality is, if you take away the cards that are being taken away here, and now the interest level I have in all the other cards goes way up.
It's just like if you remove raw benefits, it's similar to like, people who choose stats in role-playing games. Right? It's just like, I know this will always be good, no matter the circumstances. Just like, pump this stat. That's like min-maxed to the core. But when you have runners like Noise, Kit, Quetzal, it becomes way less of a straightforward, I'm going to save 1 credit, I'm going to save 2 credits. And it's more about, wow, I have access to the early game where I can break any barrier for free. Like, oh my gosh, what does that do? How does that affect things? Or maybe I'm going to choose, Noise, whose benefit is discarding cards which is totally busted in this case, but it's at least not a straight up credit exchange. You have to be more creative when you're thinking about, how do I evaluate whether this is good or not? And that's just way more exciting. When you take out Core Set HB, when you get a card, anytime you're getting a raw financial benefit for doing a basic function of the game, I think you need to get it out, right? HB, it's like, how are you ever going to beat getting a money every time you do what you're doing every turn? How do you beat that?
It's sort of like what was the name of the Indian? It's like draw a card whenever you...
Yeah, draw a card when you install a remote.
Yeah, and it's just like...
And 17 influence.
I remember seeing that and just being like, why is this in the game?
It's as if, it just...
We gave it everything.
It's crazy.
So my question now, right? So there's...
We didn't even answer your question.
Yeah,
so what's happening...
A new core set is happening.
What's happening
is the old one.
There was an old core set. It came out a long time ago, and it had cards in it that we all loved. And it was kind of the base fundamental game of Netrunner, and it's just awesome. It was really well balanced, done well. And then cards continued to come out, but cards continued to come out in ways that were sideways from the fundamental Netrunner cards in the core set, rather than kind of playing to the same theme, because they simply couldn't play to the same theme. You can have various ways of getting money. That's cool. You can have various ways of doing things, but it was very hard to compete with the base level Astro Script breaking news Sand. What do you do differently? Do you have...
Well, the problem is the only way to do something that is more interesting or worth checking out that's not that is to make something that's better, and that's just power creep.
Yeah, and then it's wild power creep, right? Yeah. It gets insane. So anyway, then we have an announcement that there's a new core set coming. First of all...
Paired with rotation for the first time.
Paired with rotation. So 2 cycles, the first 2 cycles of the game, the 12 chapter packs are leaving, okay? The old core set is leaving, and we have a new core set that has some cards from the old core set, some cards from the first 2 cycles, that is now a standalone product. And a lot of those cards that are coming into the game via the revised core set have some new art, aged
cards
characters
reprinted,
that
right?
are
like
cool.
Gabriel sticking around in
reprints of things,
in the art, which is cool.
And that's cool. And we might see in future cycles reprints of some of those old core set cards, maybe with a new twist or done differently, right? So they could always introduce those new cards. But this is good for one reason. For old players, you already have all the cards in the new core set. If you've been collecting from day one, you already have all the cards, right? So you don't need to rebuy. However, you have an incentive to do so because there's now alt art cards and those kind of things. And you're probably going to. Yeah. Let's face it, you're probably going to. Now, that's where we are. So we're going to be down 2 cycles, and we're going to be up a core set that is more fair. I don't know how you would say it. More balanced.
I mean,
in terms of the overall game.
It's the reality of you take away the things that were obviously the best, and then it makes everything that remains wildly interesting.
Right. Because there's not a go-to option.
Like my Kate example, where it's like if you remove this linchpin piece or noise, now as an Anarch, you have to really think about your life.
Yeah. Let me give you a great example. Looking at Anarch, okay? As we might.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Anarch traditionally does the following. And as it turns out, the vast majority of all runners did the following. Put Corroder in my deck, try to find a place for Yogg in my deck, and then start building, right? So like it was just the way you broke ice. Yogg was so good and so ubiquitous at one influence that you didn't see code gates. There was an entire third class of ice that just couldn't be run because, again, the fundamental exchange
was too efficient.
If I get ice up, it'll make the runner have to pay money every time, and that's going to be really taxing. Yogg breaks for 0, right? Like, well,
but it has set strength.
Well,
yeah. But okay, go ahead. To your point.
And so similarly, Desperado, right? Your criminal, and this changed quite a bit over the past few months, but for the longest time, it's like start with Desperado. Maybe try the other consoles, never can compete. Mm-hmm. Making an extra run versus getting a credit every time you make a successful run, what are you doing? Like you can't even...
Never.
Even me, as a strong Tier 2 interested player, could not get over the fundamentals of a vast majority of these cards. I just felt like I was playing stupid rather than playing interesting, right? So
important difference.
So how this has changed, so Anarch, for instance, is losing Corroder, Medium, Parasite, and Yogg. Those 4 cards have been fundamental to Anarch from day one. So we've been playing with this card for 5 years. When I remove those 4 cards, it's like the entire Anarch card pool is immediately relevant again. Maybe now Darwin is a reasonable thing to run because Corroder is not there anymore. So it's not so obviously inefficient as compared to it. Maybe I run these weird, that weird whale thing that costs like 7 to break every code gate in the game. That maybe you do the whale deck, right? You do all this stuff. There's any number of breakers now that have an option. Maybe I now import a criminal barrier breaker that also was using Corroder. So now all the criminal stuff is on the table. So it really does open up. I mean, as NBN, you lose Breaking News, Sand,
just losing AstroScript,
losing Scorched Earth. What does that do to the entire game? How
it's a
crazy!
Whole new world,
right?
It's
a lot more interesting.
So on that front, it's amazing. The game is incredibly exciting in a way that older players can appreciate it being incredibly exciting. Mm-hmm. Because if I told you in the next cycle X, Y, and Z was happening, like, look at all these exciting cards coming out, it's like, whatever. Mm-hmm. But if I told you as a player of the old game, familiar with all of these cards, they're no longer legal, imagine what that does to things. Old players should be very fascinated and interested to explore that again.
Well,
right?
And it makes 5 years of releases more relevant.
Absolutely.
I mean, the question with every release that's come out for Netrunner is, oh, cool, we're getting new breakers. Are they going to be better than Corroder?
They never are.
And the answer is always no.
They can't be.
And so now it's like the answer is default yes, because Corroder no longer exists. Yeah. So that makes things incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
So do you, as the excited Netrunner fiend...
Has that come across?
That you're getting pumped up here.
I'm sweating.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Anyways, do you think that the revised core set and rotation is enough to really reboot Netrunner in a sense that, you know, when you have a technical problem and you have to turn it on, off, and back on again to get everything working.
It's a very Netrunner.
Excuse me, sir. Have you attempted to?
Yeah, it's like a customer IT. Yes. Can you reboot it? Yeah. Thanks. Did you unplug it? Anyways, has Netrunner been unplugged and plugged back in?
And plugged back in. Okay, so for old players, I think yes, and I think that because every old player that I've talked to who has begrudgingly stopped playing Netrunner, not because they wanted to, really, but because it just wasn't interesting anymore. Mm-hmm. It just wasn't exciting anymore. The number of people who were playing, even though they weren't particularly excited by the game, just because it's so fun, even when it's the same game over and over again. I think we just needed a tiny nudge, anything, to just be like, okay, yes, it's a glimmer of hope for me to just get back in here because I love it. I love the game and I want to be playing it. So for older players like that, yes, and I think a vast majority of Netrunner players, it's like you can take the Netrunner away from the player, or whatever that analogy is.
You can take the Netrunner away from the player, but you can't take Netrunner out.
Once you're a Netrunner player, I think there's something fundamentally about you that you're always a Netrunner player, hoping to find either a better game that you never will, or coming back to it.
Is it better than Netrunner?
The game has returned to itself, and finally I can just really get the full Netrunner experience again. So I think it's enough to get people back in, and I think that we might at this point have a sustainable enough system to give confidence that this is something that can go on for the next 20 years. right? Like we're going to rotate 2 cycles out every year at this point. We're going to get 2 new cycles in the game at this point. So we're now in rotation, which means we have a set expectation of cards and card pool that is static, right? So we know the terms and we know that it's a controlled system, and there's a lot of stability to that. Is it still too many cards in the pool at once? That's the question. I mean, it's hard for me to say, but my inclination is that it's still too many.
I would crank up that rotation or crank down the rotation window.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
See,
but it might not be.
I think
we'll see.
I think there are a handful of problems that I think need, if you want a game like Netrunner, which I think it could, because the core system is so fun and strong and it's just fundamentally built well, right?
Yeah.
I think for a game like Netrunner to go the distance, to keep going on in perpetuity forever, basically, it has to answer a few very important things. And this is just the LCG conundrum, I think, as we sit now. Netrunner, any Game of Thrones, any of the games you want to throw into it, which is, are you consistently providing moments of pure absurdity and excitement for current players? So this is you're asking, is rotation enough? We're pairing it with a revised core set this time, so it's a big shift. But if you do, with I'm reminded of it because I've been playing Destiny, which is the first time I played a collectible game in a long time.
Yeah, right. You get the juice.
Which is every 3 or 4 months, we're getting like the whole world is in a new color kind of a situation. And so having a system built in, is the annual 2 cycles go away, we're adding 2 new cycles. Is that enough of a shake-up to keep people consistently engaged? Yeah. And then secondly, and this is what I don't know is the case, but if at any point in Netrunner I can buy the core set, so like now the revised core set, buy a couple copies, and then like the deluxe for the factions that I want to play, from those products alone, can I build decks that I can actually go to league nights and regionals and worlds and tournaments with? Because if that is the case, the other concern for me is the new player problem, which is like right now, new core set, I'm excited. I've always loved Netrunner. I really loved the fundamental risk-taking, money, investments, that kind of thing, right? And if I knew I could buy 3 copies of the core set and then the Shaper and the Wayland box and like build decks, that's obviously a much lower investment than 5 years of packs and boxes and all the stuff that goes with it.
Yeah. That's the entry point, I think, is still the biggest problem to be solved. If I don't think, and this is the thing, there's a scale, right? With anything, it's about balance. The bigger your card pool is for a competitive scene, the more of an onus there is on development to be rock solid. You're just having to manage more interactions and more synergies. So the smaller your card pool, the easier development should be, more manageable. So there's an advantage there. Potentially, like, there's just less mistakes made in turning things sideways. But there's also less options, so it could potentially get stale. You'll also have the problem of how long a product is active in the scene and whether or not people are willing to invest in a product that lasts a year, right? So there's all these kinds of questions. So if you shorten the window, I think you have an easier time making new cards great, but you have a harder time pitching it to players and having real diversity in a meta. So there's that, which you have to balance. And then it's your problem, the new players. How do you get the new players in easily? And it does seem like the best thing so my vision for this is, let's say even as it sits with rotation, you drop 2 cycles out. I think at that moment, you drop a new deluxe box. And that deluxe box should set the tone for that year, right? Like let's say this is the Mars box. This is the Moon box. And the next 2 cycles are going to really be diving deep into this. And this is essentially the flavor of Netrunner that we're going to be exploring this year. Next 2 cycles drop. And then we get a new deluxe. And it's like, here's this macro theme. You need that point, and that's what you mean about excitement for current players. You need that real point of, what are we going to be exploring in the world of Android this year? I think, and I don't think dropping things is enough, because that's all stuff that you've already seen. You have to have a little bit of injection. It gives you some framing for the next 2 cycles. Great, right? I think that's necessary.
Well, and I think it kind of repeats the cycle that got people interested in the first place, right? Which is, you have this new thing that is early on about discovery and exploration. In the mid part of it, it's about mastery, right? Where now it's not about exploring anymore. It's about tweaking and efficiency and ending in like a world's kind of scenario, right? What's going to be on top. And if you repeated that every year,
Absolutely.
where it's like we're shaking some things up, and I actually like we talked at length about are LCGs sustainable in one of the episodes, and basically things LCGs can do that no other format can do. And I like when you talk about that idea of like a box with 12 packs that go with it kind of a situation. I like the idea of seeing that set, like the Mars set, as a tool in the library.
Yeah.
That you can kind of use at any time.
Yeah.
And I know with Thrones 1.0, they aggressively use like a banned restricted list. And they literally controlled that meta. If they could do whatever they wanted, right? Crazy what you can do with the simple banned restricted list. But I think you could even do it across cycles, where it's like once or twice a year, you're choosing the things from the library that are active. And
yeah, we're going to play Mars and Lunar cycles, right?
And then the core products or whatever.
But if I were to build this system really from the ground up, I think you have your core set. I think all of these faction-specific deluxes have got to go. I hate to say it, but like it limits your options for tournaments and competitive play so much. But listen, hear me out. So you cut. Let's just say we get rid of all the deluxes today.
Yep.
Right. We have the core. We have the core set. And if you're a new player, here's what you buy. You buy the core set, and you buy whatever box is active during this cycle, the 2 cycles, led by a deluxe box. So you have your core set and your active current cards. And then if you want to collect the 2 cycles as they come out or catch up to those 2 cycles, you can. And then, you have, let's say, 4 cycles from previous releases that are active. But you get the feel of the current state of Netrunner by buying into kind of the current theme, the classic theme, which is core set, the current theme, which is your deluxe box, and then that kind of card pool that's right there. And these cards and all these things should be strong enough. I mean, your old cycles should really just be bringing in small tricks and maybe changes and a little bit of gains of efficiency here and there. But you should be able to cover all of your bases. You should have a 90%, 80% deck out of core set, new theme thing. Because a new theme should just introduce new ways of doing the same stuff. You're always going to do the same stuff in Netrunner. Gain money and spend money. So it's just about exciting and new ways to do that.
And based around a theme.
Based around a theme, right? So if it's the lunar cycle, maybe it's all about, can you manipulate the beanstalk, right? So you have cards for the runner that are like raiding the beanstalk and those kind of things. Maybe if it's the Mars cycle, right? Then you have those Mars-themed money-gaining cards, and they're very similar, like in terms of the efficiency trade-off. So that's what I would ultimately do. Is that possible? Will that happen? Like, I don't know. But I think if I were Fantasy Flight, what I would do is I would release this revised core set, rotate out the last 2 cycles, and see what happens. And then I'd look at it next year, and I'd say, where's the player base? Did we gain more? Did we lose more?
I was going to ask for both of you to kind of, end this segment, which is, what do you hope to see in the next year of Netrunner?
Well, did we talk about the leak? There's a leak, apparently.
There is a leak, yeah.
Snow Patrol out at 4chan.
There's like some guy named like Netrunner Tex.
Netrunner Leaker, yeah. Been leaking stuff since before I was even aware of Netrunner, apparently.
When I was a small child.
Just always, people would come into the store and say, did you see the next 5 cycles? So-and-so just leaked him, Snowbird or something. And I was like, no, I haven't. And then I'd try not to look, and then eventually someone would show me and I would look.
To blame someone else, I see.
But yeah, so apparently there's more leaks. Who's a fairly reliable source. I'm sure this is just appalling to development, FFG, etc. I actually heard Damon on the Bad Publicity podcast talking about how it's very bad for the game to have playtesters that leak stuff.
Then again, I mean, if you're going to make a game about hackers, you have to expect a certain amount.
Right?
You really do. You just extract that.
But apparently there is a banned restricted list.
Apparently there's a banned restricted list coming, like massive.
And I think that speaks to one of the problems with the revised core set and rotation is that a lot of people's favorite cards are in the first couple cycles, where a lot of them are actually sticking around because of the revised core set. But a lot of people's least favorite cards are from the last couple of cycles, which still have years before they get hit with the rotation.
Yeah.
So if there is a banned restricted list, I actually will be very happy to see it. And I'm hopeful it hits, according to leaks, it does hit almost all of the cards that are just like
bring it down, man.
It's an Armageddon. Yeah.
There's the good thing is there's so many cards in the card pool this time. Like, just wipe it out, like get
rid of any problem.
Honestly, FFG's in a situation where it's like, why not? Because would you rather get like, a slow attrition over the next year and just have it fail?
Or like give the game a shot.
Or try something and either have it fail or succeed. Like I would always take anything that has a chance of success over guaranteed failure, even if
that would be a good bet. Yeah.
So what would I like to see for Netrunner? That's the question.
That's the question, forward? Yeah. You guys are good about not answering my question.
Yeah, sorry. This is how we talk all the time.
Yeah. For our meetings are so long.
We've got the revised core set coming. That's great. It's really great for the game. But the revised core set is just a ban list of core set cards. That's really all it is. So like if we were coming into a non-rotation situation, this is just somebody releases a ban list that bans these cards out of the core set. That's it, right? And then the first 2 cycles are still in the game, and you have access to the same cards. So like it's just a really fancy ban list. And then if we get another ban or restriction on top of that, there's a lot of crafting going on. What I want to see from Netrunner, what I want to see from all of the LCGs, is a system that I am 100%, well, I can't be that I'm 90% certain is sustainable and worth investing in over the next 25 years. Tall order. I do not doubt that. But putting in something that gives development the tools and production the tools to maintain a healthy game, create excitement with the flick of a switch. By saying, and like you were talking about, I think the way that LCGs have to go competitively is you have to have the core set standard. You have to have some kind of a bigger, exciting product to get after the core set. Because you just don't really want to go from core set to packs. The payoff, the complexity of figuring out what you want pack-wise from a core set is too vast, right? If I have a core set and I really like the Anarchs, and it's like, okay, what do I want to do next? And then it's like, well, here are 64 packs. You can look through and find your favorite Anarch cards. Like, that doesn't exist, right? So you need something that's going to give you a big chunk of excitement to build on what you were already excited about in the core set. That needs to be, 50 to 60% of a lot of decks. Like, I feel like that's where the majority is. And then you need to have, occasional pack releases, cycle releases that are adding, it's hard development, it's got to be sideways. Unfortunately, it's got to be mainly sideways. New ways of doing things, interesting runners, those kinds of things. So your packs are kind of like you're sprucing up, over time, but then you need those shotgun blasts. And then I think in terms of the tournament scene, you have to be able to, like you said, pick and choose various cycles to bring in.
That's obviously just that excitement on a stick, right? It's like at any point you can point, and it's like you have to completely change your decks.
Yeah. And if it were me, like ultimately, I would have a cycle in my own head would be a deluxe box and 12 packs. We would call it something new. Let's call it like a saga or something. Probably not.
Or
the
you
best
could just name it for the year.
Yeah, in 2017 Netrunner. But let's say you have like the lunar theme, like we've been talking about, right? So I think in a perfect meta, the products that are available at the very most before any kind of rotation happens is a core set, 2 themed deluxe boxes, and 2 sets of 12 packs that pair with
like
those
2 years
deluxe
of content.
boxes. Yeah,
is the cap.
And then I would rotate this old one out whenever I print the new deluxe for the next one, right? And so then at its most minimal, it's 2 deluxes, 12 packs, and a core set. At its maximal, it's 2 deluxes, which is 24 packs and a core set.
The minimum would be a great time to get into a game.
Wouldn't that be great?
It's a very smaller amount of product.
Yeah.
And you probably don't really need those 12 packs so much. You get a core set, 2 deluxes, and
that's
get most
enough
of the experience.
to experience it. And if you really want some variation, you have packs to choose from.
And that gives me 2 years with products. Like even if I buy that last pack, I get a year with it.
But that's part of why I like the pick and choose, where it's like it can be in the rotation for a year or two, go away for a year or two, and then all of a sudden it's like, I don't remember what the name of that first cycle was. Let's just call it Lunar Cycle.
Spin cycle. What light?
Spin cycle.
Spin cycle, maybe.
It's like, hey, Lunar Cycle is going to be legal again for the first time in 2 years. It's like,
does that create any issues for you with players having to track down 3-year-old product?
Maybe. I think the other component of that is you could easily do what a lot of games have done, which is have an all-in format as well.
Yeah, have a legacy. I think that should always be standard, right?
You can go to the moons here. The people that want to run the craziness can do it. Anything on your radar?
Well, I think that there's a lot of problems, and I talked about this before, but left to be solved with the LCG. And I think Netrunner, unfortunately, that means the community is the guinea pig community, but it's Netrunner. I mean, I think of all the people, it's probably the most welcoming to that kind of stuff, especially as long as it keeps with Netrunner. But I'd like to see a way of releasing or a tournament structure or something else that is really almost as unique as the LCG format was to begin with. Something that really like takes its strengths and runs with it and does something crazy. I'd like to see it, especially in the case of potentially negating or minimizing the internet meta in a way that maximizes the regional meta. So, for instance, I think a lot of these games, as we were talking about earlier, really thrive when it's in the Wild West scenario, right? Whenever you get the juice for the big new
big sets
Destiny,
or whatever.
Yeah, and I think there are ways to do that we haven't even thought about that could be really, really cool and could really make the LCG format a very unique format. I think that would be great. So I'm very excited to see what happens. I want them to push as hard as they can. I think that, again, like we were saying earlier, Netrunner's in a unique scenario, and all LCGs will get to this scenario. Netrunner's in a unique scenario where they can do nothing and slowly watch the game die, or they can do whatever they want to and either accelerate that or hopefully reverse it.
Sure. Well, and I think for me, the main thing on Netrunner or any of the living card games, and something I would be interested to see them explore, I know having a universally understood format makes it way easier to market and talk about, but I get a sense that every LCG needs to have specific things that are different than the other LCGs. As an example, I think Netrunner does a lot better with a smaller card pool, whereas Thrones does a lot better with a bigger card pool. And so I would be curious, not just what can an LCG do that no other LCG can do, what can Netrunner do that no other game can do? Yeah. What can you do with Netrunner as far as the format, the releases, the tournaments? We're kind of seeing it with L5R where they're doing tournaments that are story-driven and story-based. And I would be excited to see them take Netrunner to a whole new level by just going, when everyone thinks they're going to go forward, just taking a total turn to the right.
Yeah.
I would love
you
that.
could even, that spurs so many ideas.
Oh my gosh, I've got so many here.
What if you had a pack that was icebreakers? It was all of this year's icebreakers, right? This is the new tech that you can get.
Yeah.
And then you have all of the new barriers. You have all of the new code gates all separated into different, and it's like you release all of that at the start of 2018. And then it's like, so here's the framing mechanism for how everything's going to go this year. Here's the icebreakers you're going to have. Here's the ice that you're going to have to deal with. We release it all at the same time because we can balance that all together. And then we release, variations and craziness to just make that insane. And then those icebreakers go away because we've got new tech. Right?
Exactly.
There's new software updates happening all the time.
I mean, that's the story of the internet, right? That needs to be built into that some stuff falls away because it just becomes one-to-one negated by new technology, and we gotta update it.
And of course, with the narrative too.
I mean, there's so much space to play
you can
there.
region lock packs to where only like people in the southern region get to play with the first pack. The second pack is released, like all the packs are at the same time.
Sky's the limit. So I hope
there's a lot
to see.
of cool stuff.
I hope that the revised core set and then ban restricted list and all this for Netrunner
It will.
is the beginning.
It'll get us another couple years at least.
of a new era, not just for Netrunner,
but
for how LCGs are being handled.
Yeah.
Period. And with that, we are going to head on to questions. You can use the hashtag AskCovenant. We'll answer your questions right here on the show. Question number 1 is from Alan on Google+. With the release of Netrunner 2.0, will there be an Anatomy of Anarch 2.0 article? This one's to Steven. So for those that don't know, before you answer, Anatomy of Anarch was basically a construct for building Anarch decks early on in Netrunner.
It was essentially a shell that revolved around, at the time, what seemed to me to be the most effective way to build any Anarch deck, right? And we were kind of seen as the lame bunch. I heard about Anarch was described as like, we're going to spend the next 20 turns annoying you, and then so hopefully we'll win somehow. And so like it came, Sam Seward from Texas, I think he's in Dallas now. Great player, wonderful guy, and does not get enough credit actually for the Anatomy of Anarchy kind of like genesis, because he was really on this account siphon destruction thing, and I saw it when he brought it up to the regional. And then built that up. Tim helped tremendously. And then I kind of just took it randomly to the Springfield Regional, did extremely well. And then from there, it was like, whew, got a lot of experience with it and started to really hone it in and make it effective. And then wrote this article. And it was kind of how I think we should be playing Anarch at this stage of the game. So now we've got Netrunner 2.0. Noise, Corroder, Medium, Parasite, Yogg, Wildside, all gone. We got a new Anarch to deal with.
The anatomy
for sure.
has changed.
Yeah, so I think so. I'm excited to discover that for myself, and isn't that really kind of the whole point, right? Like, what is Anarch supposed to do these days? It won't be a count siphon, I can guarantee you that, because it doesn't exist anymore.
DNE.
So yeah, let's do it. I'm interested in that. That's
Right.
great. I'm glad you're curious, Alan. That's great.
I will. I'll look forward to that myself. Question number 2 from David on YouTube. Very common question asker. What competitive games have been cannibalized by new releases? Do you see that happen in your community/store? I think while games are different, competitive communities that play these games are not so different. If I want a strategy card game for Star Wars, I'm not going to play Destiny and the LCG. I'm picking one. Even if they are different games, they fill a competitive card game slot. I think for those in the IA, for Skirmish, it will be this way with Legion 2. Of course,
Imperial Assault and Legion.
some will play all the games, but most pick one that fits the category.
I think that's absolutely true.
This is what we were talking about earlier with, I mean, you're probably going to play one FPS. You're probably going to play one.
And then you're going to go to the new one.
Yeah, into like once you've got it figured out, right? It's that Wild West discovery mentality that I think really humans are drawn to as a whole. That a lot of people want to discover. There's a lot smaller amount of people that want to master. And so once people get through that discovery phase, and it becomes sort of diminishing returns on their time invested, they'll go to something else.
Yeah.
Well,
easily.
Now the question is, if there's not something else there, what does that look like? Do they stop playing altogether? Or do they continue to master?
That's the best question, and I think that they do stop playing altogether. I think that the hobby has developed in such a way that there's always these new things coming out, because the fear and maybe the reality is that once somebody is, bored with the game that they're currently playing, if there's nothing to catch their attention in the space, then why continue to play tabletop games at all? I mean, I think we have an opinion about the connection element and the community element. But a lot of times, maybe that's not enough, or it's not good enough to be the reason that you want to continue playing. Right?
And for me, I think it's a very normal and healthy part of tabletop games, and really any hobby in general. But it's effectively the idea that not all games are going to last forever, and enjoy them while they're here. Enjoy them while they're being produced and supported. And I, as a person who basically has active decks for every card game I've ever played, right? Like the final, here's the 4 decks I'm going to keep around to play whenever I want. Occasionally revisit games like the Star Wars CCG, the Star Wars LCG, which I don't play as much anymore, and so on and so forth. So I think, to me, this cannibalization, while obviously if you're releasing too many products too fast, it's not going to be helpful because people are just going to bounce and communities are going to be smaller because it's spread out across games. There's a certain pacing to the industry that is natural and healthy that is actually a good thing for all the games.
Well, and talking about ways that the LCG model can be tweaked, maybe they should take that into consideration. Maybe it should be more like a Netflix sort of situation where you have one season drop once a year, and then later down the road, another season for another show completely different. And you build this sort of bouncing into your communities that allows people to migrate without cannibalization. That gives them an opportunity.
That would be really interesting. You have like a season of Netrunner, and then a couple of years later, it's like, we've got more Netrunner coming. Like just kind
Or it's like, like January, February, March is Netrunner season. April, May, June is L5R season. And it's just like, I can sweep around. If I want to stick around and master it, I've got the people who are also interested in that we can play with. But this giant influx is going to be maybe a once a year or once every.
Well, and I think just to kind of conclude on that is the idea that they kind of did that when they split the worlds apart. So they had basically Star Wars worlds and non-Star Wars worlds, and then the regional season was flipped. And I was hoping they didn't do this. I was hoping that the way they were going to structure it was that it would be sprinkled throughout the year. But the way they do it now is like Star Wars regionals are happening when non-Star Wars championships are happening. But there's 3 or 4 months where nothing's happening. And so they could have easily done it where it's Star Wars regionals for 3 months, Star Wars not Star Wars store championships for 3 months, Star Wars store championship for 3 months, not Star Wars regionals for 3 months, and then just rotated. But that is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think to put a period on the sentence, I think that this is
yes. The answer is yes.
Yes, the the cannibalization, the movement in releases is a fundamental part of human nature, and games and everything has been fighting against it, and instead of incorporating it. And I really like to see what would happen if it got incorporated.
Well, there you have it. Thank you all so much for watching. You can hashtag AskCovenant to get your question answered right here on the show. Now we're going to ask you a question. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below.
Hold on, before why am I comfortable like backpacking for the rest of my life but not playing a game?
The other question is
it every day.
The other question is why could I play Love Letter forever?
These and more are waiting.
That's a good future guest. So the question we have for you is, do you think reboots should be a standard part of expandable games? And if so, why or why not? Until next time, keep playing. I gotta redo that last question.